Happy Monday to you. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Happy Monday to you. My name is Lynn Stevens. I'm co-president for the Ohio Grandparent Kinship Coalition. As you know, we're a statewide advocacy organization focusing on the needs of caregivers who are raising their child relatives who are unable to live with their biological parents. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. And we hope today's webinar on the topic of trauma-informed care will be helpful to you. I'd like to recognize our OGKC colleagues. We have Ron Broader, board chairman, Brenda Dewberry, who's our other co-president. Siobhan Jones is our co-vice president, and she's also playing the role of treasurer. Donna Jones, our secretary, Bob Turpin, our member emeritus, long time member and board member, and you all recognize her names from all the emails that are sent out. So again, thank you for taking time for your busy schedules. We want to ask the caregivers if you want to be put into a pool to be selected for a $50 gift card. Please put your name and email in the chat. Again, caregivers only, please put your name and email in the chat. And at the end of the webinar, Barb's going to pull a name and that person will receive a $50 gift card. Our next meeting will be June 16th, and that topic is going to be the presentation is going to be on the IEP process. So if you have children, grandchildren, relatives who have disabilities or special needs, and they have an IEP, we are going to go over that, give you some more tools for your future IEPs that may be coming up that may be helpful for you. Certificates of attendance, if anyone joining would like to receive one, please put your name in the chat or email Bob Turpin and let her know you would like to receive a certificate and she can get that to you. At any time throughout your day, throughout your weeks, if you have an idea, hey, you'd like to hear a webinar on that topic, feel free to reach out to us, info@ ohiograndparentkinship.org or email Bob Turpin, since her name is on most of the emails you receive, and let us know any ideas you may have. So introduction of our speaker, our, excuse me, wonderful speaker, Ms. Yvonne Hall, is the Executive Director of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition. She received a Master of Public Administration from Texas Southern University and a Bachelor of Arts from Notre Dame College. The Cleveland Plain Dealer named her homegrown hero for her work addressing food insecurity during the pandemic. The significance of her life, leadership, and accomplishments were also selected for the History Makers Archives, the Library of Congress, which recognizes notable African Americans. Wow. In 1974, the unfortunate murder of her mother, Yvonne Boston Hall, dramatically changed her life. Her childhood promise to use her life to help others has led to the creation of cutting-edge programs and has impacted thousands of people's lives, and she was named 100 Women to Know in America. Awesome work. She's a grandmother, activist, deeply impassioned and involved in social justice activities locally and nationally. She's a nationally recognized Congressional Award winning health disparities expert, and she speaks nationwide about effectively engaging the African American community through the art of community engagement. As well. So we'll go ahead and turn over the presentation to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you all for having me. I please forgive me. I don't know if it's because of the weather patterns we've been having here, but all of our systems have been going down. So every time we thought a system was open, it was shut. And so please, technology is great when it works, and when it doesn't, it can really be a headache. So I am going to share my presentation with you now, and then hopefully you can see what I see. Does everybody see? Okay, so let me get to the view. All right. So everybody's on the same page, I hope?
Yeah, we can see
It's
that.
it's me. Hold on. Let's see if we can go back to, it would decide to do their own presentation on its own. Okay, hold on. I need to go back to the beginning. Do it the way I know. Just keep going back until it finishes. I am Yvonka, Executive Director of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition. I should say nationally recognized Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition. For us, being with you all today is important. Being able to talk about ACEs and the impact on communities of concern. Our work is to address the social, structural, environmental, and behavioral determinants of health in communities of concern. As you know, with this whole current administration around not being able to use certain words, our organization is the Black Health Coalition, and we focus with communities of concern. So whether it's African Americans or whether it's Hispanic or white communities, those communities are disproportionately impacted, particularly if they live in urban areas. And so for us, the introduction around this topic is that many kinship families are caught in a balancing act, really, of trying to manage children that have experienced a traumatic life experience. But we also understand that adults are still haunted by traumatic experience that happened to them when they were young. For us, we must work to create conditions for strong, thriving families and communities where all children and youth are free from harm. And so that is a yeoman's task. For us, being able to define ACEs and looking at ACEs and saying it is defined as traumatic events that happen to children between the ages of 1 and 17. These negative experiences affect the child's brain and the health as they grow into adults. ACEs can lead to mental health or chronic health conditions or other behaviors that lead to mental health and other chronic health conditions. According to the National Library of Medicine and the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, as actually a member of the National Library of Medicine, ACEs disproportionately impacts African Americans because of the profound subjection to historical and systemic oppression, in addition to personal and intergenerational trauma. So when we look at all of these things, this is how we define ACEs. Why prevention is important. Adverse childhood experience can have a long-term impact on health, opportunity, and well-being. And adverse childhood experiences are common, and some groups experience them more than others. So we've talked about that. What we need to do first. We need to make sure that we educate the community and seek policy changes. Policy is our way to help implement change around conditions that disproportionately impact the community. So if we have things that, and we're not looking at a policy piece as an outcome, there's no use for us to have it. So ACEs should actually be included in the declaration of racism as a public health crisis. And so I think that part of it is that we had these declarations that were instituted all over the United States in 2020, and many of them were just a blank declaration. So what we want them to do is look at new policies that look at the cumulative impact of ACEs. So the things that happen that accumulate over a person's lifetime. We have to strengthen individual coping in the face of adversity. So we need to make sure that systems are in place to help families to enhance family relations and resilience. And we have to promote community to reduce ACE exposure in communities of concern. And for us, that is a big deal. For me, I have to tell my story. You heard Lynn say, in 1974, death of my mom. This is my beautiful mom. This is me. I look the same. I want to say I look the same. Um, so this is me at 2 years old and my little brother. So I have a brother that's 9 months younger than me. And then I had two other brothers who are 3 years and 4 years younger than me, respectively. My mom was married young, at 17 years old, is when she had me. And at 24, so she went through a ton of verbal and physical abuse. And then at 24 years old, and I was 6, my mom was murdered in front of myself and my younger brothers. And so that was my call to action. Like, how can I help other people to not experience the things that happened to me? One of the things about telling our stories is when these things happened to us in 1974, it was at a time, and we still are at that time with African Americans. Some African Americans have embraced the concept of seeing therapists. But in 1974, really, it was like, you'll just get over it. And that's basically what has happened to a lot of our families. And so when we talk about some of these experiences, how they impact us, we can't go too far, but to look at the news. So understanding that when Tamir Rice was murdered, Tamir Rice's sister rushed to her brother's side upon learning that he'd been shot. Officers tackled her, handcuffed her, and placed her in a squad car with a police officer that shot her brother. So she was put into the car with the very officer that she had just seen kill her brother. The 15-year-old boy is my younger brother. My younger brother was killed on his way home from school in a racial incident on his way home from school in front of all of his friends. So how did that impact all of his friends? Traumatically. We had many friends that have been involved in the justice system since then. We have many friends that have died. We have other friends that have alcohol and drug abuse issues as a direct result of what happened. The mother that was 24 killed by her ex-husband in front of her four young children, myself and my brothers. In Warrensville 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, we had a mother who was really popular in the community. She was a hairstylist. She was killed in front of her teenage daughter by her partner. We also have Rachel Gentile, who we don't talk about much anymore. She is a young woman now, but she was the person that was on the phone with Trayvon Martin just before he died. We had a Minneapolis girl who witnessed her mom's murder. And this is one of the cases that I will never forget as long as I live. There was a Chicago boy, he was 14 years old. His nickname was Yummy Sandifer. He was lured to death by teens after participating in a drive-by shooting. And they lured him into an alleyway underneath the train station and murdered him. And so thinking about how that in fact impacted those young people who participated in that, but also his family and his brothers and sisters. For us in the United States, nearly 1 to 1/3 of our youth experience at least one ACEs before age of 18. That's a lot of young people. And so when we talk about our urban areas, we see it even more. Which areas are most impacted? The areas with the red line. So when we see these red lines, so this is a map of Cleveland. And so if we follow that red line, what we see food apartheid, we see lack of educational attainment, we see a lot of lead poisoning, we see a number of things around air quality, we see the Juvenile Justice Center, which is right in the heart of our Cleveland community. So these are the communities that are most impacted. So no matter where you go across the country, the communities that were there where that red line went through those communities are the communities that we see that are most impacted by ACEs. So ACEs trauma, understanding that the Health and Human Services Department, for what is left of the Health and Human Services Department, the ACEs trauma are forms of physical, emotional abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And I know that some of us look at it and say, oh, all of our households are dysfunctional. But when we look at ACEs, we look at some general things that are happening: physical and sexual and emotional abuse, emotional and physical neglect, living with a family member with mental health or substance use disorders that's not being treated, witnessing domestic violence, sudden separation from a loved one. Remember that we had systems that literally pull children from their parents. No matter how much your parent has done, children still love their parents. And so when we have these separations, are we providing the services that children need? Poverty. Looking at the poverty issues, we know that many of our ACEs families are living in poverty, around 20%. And right now, if I probably redid the I would probably see a lot more in our urban core. that a lot more of our children are now living in poverty. Racism and discrimination. We cannot forget about the impact of racism and discrimination, including of how some children have been forcibly removed and then put into other families where families have also abused them. Talking about violence in the communities. We live in communities that are extremely violent. And then when we see the perpetrators of violence, we're starting to see them at younger and younger ages. The divorce rates. So when we see divorce, we see a lot of cases around adverse childhood experience because of what has happened when parents are separating. When we also have children in violence against their mothers. So when we're seeing those things happen, but for us, a large part of it is mental illness. Untreated mental illness is very important when we're talking about the impact around ACEs. And then having a relative who has been sent to prison or jail. And so if I was talking to young people who are now older people, whose parents were sent to jail in the 80s when we did the whole thing, the war on drugs, which became a war on African American communities. Those children still have not, young adults who are now also parents, are still reeling with the impact of not being able to see their parent, for their parent being locked away for so long. Many are blaming themselves, many are blaming their parents. So their relationships with their parents who are now returning citizens, who are now older, the relationships are impacted. Looking at the effects of adverse childhood experience and understanding that people who live through this trauma will often struggle as adults. I just talked about it. Trauma increases the risk of depression and substance abuse and can lead to more aggressive behavior in adults. So this is research. This is not just me. So this is what research has shown us. For instance, ACEs increase the odds of alcohol and drug abuse, which also increase the risk of smoking. And so if we look at the number of smokers that we have in the African American community. We have a lot of people who smoke. And so we have firsthand smoke, we have secondhand smoke, we have thirdhand smoke. So thirdhand smoke is the smoke that's found on your clothes, in your pillows, on your couches. So there is that correlation. And so people who live in those environments, we more than likely see them with asthma or bronchitis or other types of lung issues. We look at depression, looking at leading to sedentary lifestyles, which can lead to obesity. So a lot of times what happens is people are more withdrawn. They take in food as their coping mechanism, and so which leads to obesity issues. And so when we talk about obesity, we have to talk about heart disease, we have to talk about stroke, we have to talk about diabetes, those other things that go along with obesity, employment difficulties, looking at what has happened to you as a child, understanding, are you able to take direction? Are you able to listen to other people tell you things that you need to do? Are you able to gain employment? Are you able to keep employment? So looking at all of those things, health issues such as diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and stroke, which we just talked about, and having a higher risk of contracting an STD or an STI, which is sexually transmitted disease or sexually transmitted infection, including HIV. So if we look at the number of children, of young people right now, who've had adverse childhood experiences, if we look at their rates around HIV, their numbers are excessively high. So we have a large contingent of young people who are now being diagnosed with HIV. Also looking at the number of young people, particularly for the first time in history in the African American community, that are attempting suicide. And so looking at these effects and understanding that childhood poverty and ACEs, and looking at this three strikes, people who live with higher incidence of ACEs were more likely to drop out, not complete high school, be unemployed, going back to the whole employment issue, living in a household that is below the poverty level. 1 in 6 adults experience 4 or more types of ACEs. At least 5 of the top 10 leading causes are associated with ACEs, and preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%. And this is from my friends at the CDC, which the CDC is totally different right now than the CDC that we once talked about. I talked about racism a little bit earlier, but understanding that racial discrimination and other adverse childhood experience are risk factors. And so looking at racial discrimination represents a prevalence of ACEs among Black children that can be detected among children as young as 6 years old. So what do we see when we look at Black children? So for Black people, when we look at Black children, we see children. But for other people, for racists, when they look at children, they see grown people. And so children are specifically targeted when they're African American because they're perceived to be older than what they are. Alarmingly, Black adolescents report an average of 5 encounters of racial discrimination a day. So a day. Looking at what's going on with our adolescents and understanding that they're being targeted. It comes as no surprise that depression and anxiety are among the most pronounced mental health problems associated with racial discrimination in youth, leading to a lot of what we're looking at around our the number of completed suicides in African American youth for the first time in history. This information came from the National Library of Medicine. And so how do we look at all of this for us? So for us, I look at health as a center of everything. And then we look at all of these things that are going around here. So we look at the community, we look at our society, we look at our individual, we look at the family, but we have to look at all of these systems. What are the human rights issues that are going on? The behavioral issues, the biological, the environmental issues, the equity and social justice, and gender, information and communication, science and technology. So all of these are determinants of health. And so when we look at ACEs, we know that people are disproportionately impacted by environmental toxins and ACEs. So when we talk about environmental toxins, these are common issues that impact urban environments and contribute to cognitive outcomes that are associated with the environment and childhood nurturing. The relationship between ACEs and environmental exposures should not be disconnected from anything else because these childhood environmental exposures they include outcomes for our young children around having learning disabilities, lowered IQ, memory and attention problems, and poor overall educational outcomes, which leads to all these other things we talked about before around around jobs, around health, around employment opportunities. So looking at these, but for me, I talk a lot about lead. And let me tell you why. Lead is a neurotoxin which can cause educational disabilities, behavioral changes, and organ failure. There is no safe exposure to lead. And so when we look at urban communities, understanding the amount of lead, and so I know that all of us can probably talk about Flint, Michigan, and the fact that the lead poison crisis that's going on in Flint, Michigan. But in Cleveland, Ohio, Flint, Michigan's rate of lead poisoning because of their water is about 7.2%. In Cleveland, Ohio, our lowest rate is 14.2%. So our lowest rate is about 2 times that of Flint, Michigan. When we look at some of our neighborhoods, more than 40% of the children are lead poisoned. Some kindergarten classes where more than 93, almost 94% of the children are lead poisoned. It is causing lead causes learning disabilities, behavioral problems, seizures, in extreme cases, death. Lead is particularly dangerous to children under the age of 6 because their growing bodies absorb more lead than adults. And it impacts their developing brain and nervous systems. And plus, lead mimics calcium. So it makes your body think that you have something that is not there. And you need calcium in order for your bones to do the things that they do. Childhood lead exposure can manifest in adults for risk of increased heart and kidney disease, dementia, and diabetes are all directly tied to lead poisoning. Unresolved trauma and ACEs. The reason why ACEs create so much havoc in our lives is due to unresolved trauma. Trauma changes who you are on the inside. It alters your nervous system. It sticks with you. They will haunt you and make it difficult for you to ignore or push it away. It causes mental and emotional damage. Even though you may be an adult now, deep down inside, you still carry the child who was scarred and scared. Unresolved trauma on your nervous system operates in this whole fight or flight all the time. So imagine is your body is always in a fight or flight mode. This is how the body tries to protect you. This is in the background, unnoticed until memories come back in the form of flashbacks or anxiety. And so looking at our environment. And so what we want to say is that all of our environments are healthy. And so in this society right now, we have folks that are trying to tell us that, hey, all of you all have trees that are growing well. But what we do know is that when inequities are high and community assets are low, health outcomes are worse. And so when we look at these health outcomes, this is what we see that's going on in our community. We have trees that are literally dying because the roots, the things that are happening at the roots are causing the trees not to grow. And so we look at ACEs in very much the same way. There is a dark side of coping. Understanding the unresolved trauma, you numb yourself with drugs, alcohol, or other addictions. Your life feels out of control. You can't seem to shake the feeling. Remember, this isn't your fault. You are not to blame for being exposed to ACEs as a child. The impact of these experiences linger for years. There is light at the end of the tunnel. I know I've talked about some deep stuff, but many children who experience trauma go on to lead relatively normal lives. But in others, there is hope. The mind may say it's hopeless, but therapy does offer us an opportunity. We have to seek out trauma treatment or trauma-informed care. And so that means that we have to make sure that we have care that's available for people in our community. How do we get to health equity? Equity is achieved when every person has the opportunity to attain his or her full health potential, and no one is disadvantaged from achieving their potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstances. What we need to change. We need to change how people think about the causes of ACEs and who can help prevent them. We have to shift the focus from individual responsibility to community solutions. And part of those solutions are around policy changes. We have to reduce stigma around seeking help with parenting challenges or for substance misuse, depression, or suicidal thoughts. We have to promote safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments where children live, learn, and play. That is so vitally important. We have to make sure that policy change to include racism and lead. We have to have progressive leaders. We have to have leaders who are willing to take on these tasks of helping to change policies. We have to change the school funding formula. We have to pay people a living wage. We have to train more Black male therapists and teachers, and we have to have equitable kinship funding. We have to make sure that parents and kinship parents have the dollars that they need in order for their children to live happy lives. But we have to understand this. This is not something that African Americans created. What white Americans can never fully understand, but what the Negro can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. In other words, white institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. This came from the Kerner Commission report that was issued on February the 29th, 1968. This report was a report that was shelved, but this actually could have helped us with what we have that's going on now around ACEs and the other issues that are disproportionately impacting our society. Um, I am Yvonka Hall. I am the Executive Director of the nationally recognized Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Yvonka. That was a lot of powerful information, and you went through it very well. Does anybody have any questions or want to make some comments about what Yvonka has presented in terms of your involvement or your understanding or any kind of relationship with trauma, either working in the field or dealing with it or helping others deal with it? We have a great presentation comment, and that's true. Ivanka, I have a sort of a question. How much do the systems, like the mental health system, the education system, our healthcare system, how much do they really know and understand about the effects of the ACEs and trauma and what needs to be addressed with that?
You know what? It's funny that you would ask that. When you look at the education systems, and understand too around ACEs, one of the things I think I talked about in the presentation around food apartheid. And so, when we talk about the fact that the school funding formula, um, You know, we have literally done away with having counselors in schools, particularly in urban schools. We have police, but when you look at counseling systems and systems that are there to actually have a way for children that are having a rough time, we don't have that. And then we don't have the time. So going into a school system is like going into a medical doctor's appointment where they say, you got 15 minutes to tell me whatever you're going to tell me, you know, and so you go in and you got like this whole thing and you want to tell them and they're like rushing to get you out of there. But I think that one of the things that's important is that in urban schools, we don't have the funding that we need in order for us to have the counseling that families and students need. Because one of the things is that since we do have some schools that are in the community, and since if you have young children, you're taking them to those facilities, then, you know, we could have after school programs that are available to families to talk about ACEs and to talk about some of these things that are available. But because of how these schools are funded, they literally, at the end of the day, they shut their door. They're done. And so having activities for children to do and things to keep them busy. So I grew up in the 70s. I don't know how many people on here grew up in the 70s, but in our playground, we had basketball courts, we had other things for us to do. And so my brothers were always at the playground, always doing stuff, but it was always adults there. So there were people for us to be able to talk to. Our teachers knew the things that were going on in our house and what had gone on in our house. And so I think that we just don't have enough training, more like with the police, with the policing systems where your beautician actually has to take a cultural competency class, but police don't. I think it's the same with our with our school systems, is that we don't have enough educators that understand how their students are being impacted, and we don't have enough Black educators, particularly to talk about some of the things that are going on, that for our kids to actually feel comfortable talking to them about some of the things that are going on at their house. And so I hope that answered your question.
Right, because I think, looking at the school systems and some of the issues that we see with behavioral problems, a lot of times kids are just labeled that they're a troublemaker. And, nobody's really trying to go beneath that in terms of identifying, well, why is this kid acting out? What is going on with this kid at home or, in the community? And that's unfair. I mean, that sets that kid up for failure, like you said, into the adult life.
And remember
And
too, that the ACEs, that that lead poisoning looks like ACEs. So when you
mhm,
talk about the impact around lead poisoning, so you may diagnose a child with ADHD, and what they have is lead poisoning. And one of the things that you can help with lead poisoning is food. And so being able to feed children a healthy meal. And so schools don't feed kids healthy meals, not here in the United States. If you've ever looked at, well, in urban communities, in suburban communities, their menus are different. But if you look at what your kids are actually eating at school, they're eating garbage. And so a lot of kids have no fruits or vegetables all day long. And so their body has no way to try to help them to be able to fight back from some of the things that they're going through. Food is a great equalizer. Food changes things and not having those things. And so you have all of these pieces that are missing from inner city schools and from inner city, homes and from any inner city doctor's offices. Like people don't understand the gravity of what is happening to young people and why we label them as the Kia boys when the Kia boys came from somewhere. And for many of them, if we actually go and talk to find out what happened, we'll find out that they had some type of adverse childhood experiences. And we label them as a way for us to ignore them, to say, oh, well, that's just, they're just bound to do that, but they're not.
there's a comment from Darlene. I learned about some of the ways it affects us as we get older. Thank you so much, Yvonka. And that's true. Like you said earlier, sometimes uh, you really don't know until you do get older that there were events in your life that have shaped how you react and what causes some of your trauma and not having dealt with it and mostly by the time you get to an adult.
Yeah, a lot of people have unresolved trauma from their youth. And like I said, when I was growing up, we didn't send anybody to a therapist because that's not what Black people did. So my brothers and I never went to a therapist. I actually, worked within the setting for a long time. But my brothers have dealt with alcoholism, domestic battery. They have had all of those things happen. And then for me on the other side, where I've had to deal with domestic violence from a spouse, verbal, emotional. And so looking at those things and how it impacts, and then understand the generational things. There were things that I wanted to give my son that I thought I was, and I wasn't because it wasn't given to me. And so looking at, the things that happen to us that we don't even think about, like, do you hug your kids or do you hug, like my son was like, you don't hug me, but you hug everybody else's kids. And I'm like, but I do hug you. But for him, he was like, you hug them a lot more than what you hug me. And I'm like, okay, is that an internal thing? For me, is that I'm thinking that because I'm providing you, remember, I grew up with old people, I grew up with old Black people. So you had a roof, you had food, you had a house to live in, you had food to eat. And so that we were providing you everything that you needed. And so we have to understand that having a house to live in and food to eat isn't everything that our young people need, that they need so much more.
And then that's true. I mean, it's multifaceted. It's not just one simple answer. If it was, you'd be rich, I'm sure. But we certainly appreciate it. Make sure that okay, let me see. Oh, somebody made a comment. Thank you for this presentation. It's unreal to think of all the trauma we went through as kids, and and continues as adults. I had no idea. So you sort of awakened some things in people now that they may be able to address even as adults, and go back a few years and look at where some things may have affected them that they didn't realize. Anybody else have any comments or questions that they want to put out there for Yvonka? Well, I think everybody's made the comments that we've seen, I think, are reflective of probably what everybody has felt about your presentation, and it's been very informative. Hopefully those of us who work with families and those of us who just, have our own lives can look at what's going on in our lives and make sure that we're comprehensive in looking at families, not just one piece of that family or one action or one symptom, but to look at the whole family and take in consideration what are the impacts of that family's environment and what's going on in their lives and the children's lives. So I think this is uh, started a started a communication of things that people really need to take a look at, and not just focus on one symptom, but let's look at everything. Want to make sure that everybody knows about the June 16th presentation on IEP process. I know a lot of families are dealing with IEPs in terms of the process, as well as just going back and doing the reviews, because the reviews can be very emotional and traumatic. I mean, that can be a trauma in itself, is going into the IEP meetings when you're sort of, you're going against, sometimes going against administrators, not all the time. A lot of times they are compliant and are doing what they need to do, but there are cases where they just are not following through. So that can be very hard when you're trying to deal with that with the child that you have, and not feeling like you have support. So hopefully the meeting and presentation will open up some avenues and give you some information about how you can deal with IEPs and the meetings and all of the things that come along with that. And in terms of our selection for the, I'm sorry, for the gift certificate, we are going to present that to Adam Gard. I believe he is the first. I don't know if Adam's been on here before, but I do recognize his name. But thank you, Adam, for attending and participating. And thanks to everybody else who attended and participated and received a lot of good information. And the people who requested certificates.
You have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Karen has her hand up, but I also want to let people know that even with the IEPs for parents to make sure that that they read their children's IEPs, because I have literally known them to copy and paste IEPs. And so you make sure that your IEP is written for your child. You make sure that you read it. And if you don't know how to read, that you make sure that you contact someone that can tell you whether it is written for your child. I've seen it a number of times. And I think that that is egregious, that you could take an IEP that's someone else's child and basically copy it and then hand it to me and ask me to sign it. And so basically, reading is something that's going to be vitally important. And so we have a lot of low literacy levels in our community. And so it's important for our parents to either get someone that they trust that's able to read through things for them, so that they can make sure that they're getting the best help that they can for their child. And Karen, I'm sorry, you have your question.
You guys hear me? No? Can you hear me?
Yes,
You can? Okay, great.
yes.
I'd like to thank Yvonka for her presentation. I am the Maternal Wellness Project Lead at the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And I think this problem is so much bigger than we can, I'm over at FASD. FASD can look a lot like ADHD also. And it is underdiagnosed and misdiagnosed many a times. Everything Yvonka said is true in our communities, but I think because it's so complicated, it's so much bigger. Like schools, I'm surprised that teachers don't know about a lot of these things, but their education that they get does not involve all these issues that these kids have. They focus on education. And now the education system is up under the governor's office. So that's going to make things a whole much more difficult to get programming in these schools, because their goals is to testing and getting funds in for their schools, which includes attendance and a lot of things that don't have anything to do with the humanity of people. So for me, a lot of times I think it starts with these nonprofits, and it starts in our own homes, our own communities, our own neighborhoods, just treating people with compassion. And I live in a neighborhood where somebody was complaining about a kid picking a flower out of their yard. And I'm thinking, I know when I was growing up, I might not have had money to buy my mom a gift. So I might pick a flower out of somebody's yard. And for that to be like somebody look at it as almost a crime to have to tell your kid, that is sad to me. So thank you, Yvonka, for, taking charge of this initiative. We have a trauma-informed care conference going on next week here at the department. It's a 2-day event. It's already closed up for registration though. But as mental health agencies, we do try to address this issue, but it has to do with funds and, it's a lot of red tape. So I just think as humans, we need to be more open and compassionate toward people that might look different. Because by the time a kid with FASD, by the time they get to be 8 years old, they've experienced a lot of trauma. It's all wrapped up into those issues. By the time an autistic person probably reaches a certain age, they've experienced some trauma. So just thank you. Thank you for what you're doing out in the community, Yvonka.
Thanks, Karen, for your insight, especially being part of that agency that does, hopefully, is looking at the mental health in terms of trauma. And I think there's a saying, an old saying, I can't remember the commercial, but it's like, pay me now or pay me later. Either, if you either address the things now up front or try to figure out ways to address them, or there's going to be a big payout later if you don't. And I think we see that in the prison systems, the mental health systems, all of the systems, you know, are overwhelmed, and but you end up paying more for it if it's not addressed. A couple more comments. I
You know,
still haven't. Go
Barbara,
ahead. I'm sorry.
they say the question you should ask yourself is, I wonder what happened to that person. Not, you know, like, why did that? Because people always got a story. Like those kids in DYS that have those sexual traumas, is because they've been sexually abused themselves and nobody paid attention to them. So they get to these institutions and you're wondering why they did it. Like, what happened to them? I always ask myself when I see these crazy things is, I wonder what happened to them.
Right. And those are questions that need to be asked. You're right, definitely.
Barbara,
Another, uh-huh.
Dr.
Go ahead.
Dotha Peterson had a question for Yvonka's organization.
Oh,
And I
okay.
think that's worth answering for Yvonka. I think her question, Yvonka, was have there been changes in terms of funding and what has happened, you know, in terms of how your organization has been able to operate in the last few months over the new climate that's come in?
So Ron, so what is going on with the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition over the last few months is that, you know, first off, we are Black and I am a woman. So those are two words that can no longer be used. The Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition is now listed as a terrorist organization. And so if we go online for government funding, we're actually automatically taken out of the system. So we can't apply for any government funding. So for us, hopefully, you know, people will donate to the organization so we can continue to work because all of our funding right now is government funding. And so you know, when we look at, you know, the CDC, HHS, all of my folks from EPA are gone. I just talked to my people from NOAA earlier today, and they were talking about all the changes that they're pulling down from NOAA, NIFWID, from, you know, OMH, just all of the things that are happening. HRSA, which, you know, provides a lot of our money when we talk about addiction services and things like that. A lot of their dollars are coming from HRSA. And all of these agencies are going to face a lot of cuts because those things are being looked at as DEI. And because they're being DEI, they're being looked at as DEI, they're cutting all of them.
Yeah, well, that's still in, you know, right now it's like either we ignore it now and pay for it later. I don't know how you get people to understand that, especially those that have the purse strings. So hopefully we'll eventually get some changes to that attitude about and it's, you know, DEI is not what it's about. They, you know, to label everything DEI has done a disservice to the people in the United States because it's not what it's about. But one of the comments here: African Americans do not want to get therapy, even though it can help. And I think Yvonka did touch on that. That has been sort of a stigma in the African American community to ask for mental health help. And hopefully some of that is changing. People are realizing that, you know, they may be able to get some help. Part of the problem is, and I know there are not a lot of resources for African Americans in the mental health field. There are not a lot of African American mental health professionals, so it's hard for African Americans to relate to somebody who is of another culture or race, and so that can be part of the problem. And then the other problem is, depending now, especially with all the talks about the budget cuts, Medicaid, and people not having health insurance, it's just going to exacerbate that whole problem that people aren't going to have the availability of being covered in order to get mental health treatment. So there are a lot of barriers right now to helping people deal with these issues. Raising my grandson, I see myself more verbally aggressive than I'd like to be. I have a great deal of trauma and have been in therapy for years. So there we have a sort of a generational thing between, you know, a caregiver and the child, that that trauma is sort of spilling over into that child's life. And So obviously they've recognized that. So getting therapy is a good thing. Teachers aren't taught psychology, that their focus is education. And I think Yvonka has touched on that. A lot of the resources are basically for testing and making sure that they're staying on task with curricula. So there's not a whole lot of support, probably financially either, for any of the mental health issues that kids have. And I think they've taken a lot of the counselors out of the schools because of the inability to pay for them. For caregivers in the meeting, the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities, OCECD, have parent mentors that assist with special education system. They would read or review an IEP or even attend a meeting with parents or caregivers. And we have had representatives from the coalition do presentations for us on IEP process. So if you go onto the website, if you didn't attend one of those, if you go onto our website, just Google OGKC and it'll come up under the resources. Those presentations have been recorded and they're on the website if you want to go into that. Or you can Google the Ohio Coalition for Education of Children with Disabilities and go to their website, and they will give you the information that you need to connect with them if you need help with IEP process. And teachers should be taught about all things that children are or can go through: ADHD, autism, and speech delay. Once again, yep, those are significant things that can impact a child's ability to be educated and involved in school, but a lot of times they're not being addressed. Somebody's is divulging that they were assaulted at age 3, never able to tell anyone, and just recently addressed that trauma in therapy. So there you have a traumatic situation that's been in that person's life for many years, and they finally are able to recognize it and get it addressed. So bless you. Thank you for being able to move forward with that. Everything centers around poverty. Not enough has been done to bring folks out of poverty, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. So we're going to be dealing with probably a lot more traumatic issues and experiences as we move into this era that we're in right now. Oh, yeah, FASD is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And we've had presentations on that too. And again, if you go to the website, that presentation is on there, and it's very good because it does directly relate to what we've discussed today when kids are exposed to alcohol before they're born, and the parent has been either drinking a lot or is an alcoholic, and that has caused the issue with fetal alcohol spectrum. Okay, I think that looks like it might be all. So appreciate the feedback that people have given. Yvonka, I'm sure that helps her and it helps us to know that this was a worthwhile presentation. And it seems like it's given a lot of people some things to think about. So thank you, Yvonka, again for an excellent presentation. And I can see us having you back maybe next year, just to bring new people in and bring some the other people in that maybe have been able to start dealing with their trauma, or their family trauma.
Barb?
Yes.
Hi, this is Darlene Robeson. Can I say something right quick?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
My grandson, he's 9. He's special needs, ADHD, and autism. And I went to his IEP, and his contact from I Am Boundless, she went with me. And she was there and she was able to ask them questions that I didn't know I should ask. And that was very helpful to me. I think it helps when you have somebody who knows about IEP and ETR and all that other stuff, help you
Right.
deal with what the teachers and the administrators are saying, because some of the things you don't know. She's been to our home and she has talked with Josiah, watched him, and she knows him. So she was able to say, well, why is he not getting this and he should be getting that? And, you know, things I didn't even think about asking. And I think it's very helpful to have someone else with you when you do your IEP.
It certainly does, because like you said, you know, the caregiver is just not informed about all of the things that the schools need to do. So you're sort of on the end of you know, that end of not being able to advocate for as much as you could. So connecting with the resources out there that will help families with IEPs, because like has been said, there are organizations that will accompany you to the IEP, that know what's required and what they are supposed to do. And I think it's a good idea to connect with those organizations to be able to have somebody go and make sure that that child gets what they deserve.
I just wanted to also say to Yvonka, thank you so much for bringing forth the some of the information around lead. And I think we probably will ask you to come back and talk a little bit more fully on that. Yvonka was established the first lead coalition in the state of Ohio, and much of the work that's going on right now in Ohio around lead identification and the outcomes that are how they're affecting our children. Yvonka initiated that work in Cleveland. So, you know, she is really known and has gathered a great deal of information and expertise in that area. So Yvonka, we do appreciate that. And I do think some of our families need to know more about that, because I think some of our children are being misdiagnosed, whether it's, you know, fetal alcohol or lead poisoning, and they're treating them for ADHD and other things, and they shouldn't be over medicating. So we will probably ask you to come back. And I also wanted to recognize Dr. Annetta Wilson, who is on the call today. Dr. Wilson is a nationally known kinship care expert. She's known around the country. In fact, she's internationally known. She's been in this work for over 30 years. She operates the Sankofa House out of Chicago, which is an organization where relatives, grandparents, and other relatives are able to raise their relative child in the same facility. And when the child is aging out, the child is able to get an apartment right in that facility. And she's one of the first people to come up with a sort of co-location residential facility for grandparents raising grandchildren, who then, when the grandchildren age out and become 18 and want their own place, they're able to get their place, but still in a community right there where their grandparents are and other people who have helped the grandparents in providing support. She has a total program that she operates out of Sankofa in Chicago. So we're just glad to see you today, Dr. Wilson, and just feel honored that you joined us today. If you want to say something, we'd be glad to have you say it.
Well, I just think, thank you so much for inviting me, and I do try very hard to get to most of your presentations that you have, but this was one of the best, and it's right on target, and I just want to say, keep up the good work.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for your comments and participating. Thank you, everyone else, for participating and being with us today. It was a very good discussion. I'm glad we had a lot of feedback and back and forth discussion. Sometimes we don't have that, but obviously this is an issue that you know, everybody is able to at least relate to and understand that it's not being addressed fully as it should. So this has been very helpful. I think that's it. I thank everybody for attending, and thank you, Yvonka, once again for your information. And like Ron said, we look forward to having you back to deal with the lead issue.
Thank you for having me.
you're on target with that issue also. So thank you everybody for joining, and have a wonderful spring day today. And we'll see you in June, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Bye.